Hi everyone, and welcome to this lesson on your biological rhythms topic area. So you've been set the rhythms previously, so you've already completed the circadian rhythm and we've started looking in class at the infradian rhythm. I've chosen to make you this lesson for the ultradian rhythm just because we might not necessarily have time to work through this in class. So before we get started, you will need your biopsych booklets available to you. It will probably be helpful to have it open to page 51 in the first instance. You'll need a pen and paper as well, just to take some notes down with the first material that I'm going to go through with you, and highlight a pen. So if you just get yourself sorted, booklet open to page 51, and then we'll get started. Okay, so the rhythm that we're going to focus on in this lesson is the ultradian rhythm. Now, just because I haven't been through this with you in class, I just wanted to clarify the difference between the three bodily rhythms in terms of the durations. So the circadian rhythm, as you should know from your preview drill last week, completes in approximately one 24-hour window. Okay, so circa means day. Okay, circadian is completion in one day. So the sleep-wake cycle is completed once every 24 hours. The infradian rhythms are rhythms that take longer than 24 hours to complete any one cycle. Hence, we've got the menstrual cycle included as an example there that takes 28 days to complete. The ultradian rhythm is the shortest of all the cycles. So if we're using 24 hours as a marker, circadian is once every 24 hours, infradian is longer than 24 hours to complete, ultradian, as you can see on the screen, is less than 24 hours to complete any one cycle. So the main example of the ultradian rhythm that we're going to go through with you is the sleep rhythm, okay, or the sleep cycle. Now, just to clarify and make this kind of stand out in your notes when we start going into the booklet, the sleep cycle is very, very different to the sleep-wake cycle. The sleep-wake cycle, as I've just said, takes one 24-hour period to complete, i.e. you go to bed once a day and you wake up once a day. The sleep cycle technically repeats itself approximately 5 times per night, and it only takes about 90 minutes for one cycle to be completed. Therefore, it's classed as ultradian. It takes less than 24 hours to complete. So now that we've clarified that, let's go in a little bit more detail on this ultradian rhythm. So as I've just said, just to repeat, the sleep rhythm typically repeats itself approximately 5 times per night. Now, obviously, that's on average. If you're a good sleeper, it might be more than that. If you're a poor sleeper, then it might be less than that. But most people, on average, go to sleep approximately 5 times per night. And again, the approximate cycle lasts a duration of about 90 minutes. But again, poor sleepers, they might complete a cycle of sleep that is only 45 minutes, okay? It very much is based on individual differences, but all of this is approximations. Now, not only does the cycle repeat itself about 5 times per night, each 90-minute sleep cycle actually consists of 5 different stages, and you do need to know about all of those different stages for your exam. We want you to be able to produce really technical answers, so we're going to take a look at those 5 different stages in detail. Now, the first thing to know about those 5 different stages is that they're all characterized by different brain waves. So just to clarify and just to refresh, that the brain waves that we see in a sleep cycle would be monitored by an electroencephalogram, so an EEG. You already know about this way of measuring the brain from what we've been doing recently, but they're all measured by an EEG. And when we're monitoring sleep, we see 4 different waves being demonstrated. I will go through each one of them in the context of the sleep cycle, but just to make you aware of what the 4 waves are that I'm going to be talking about. So at the top of the screen, we've got beta brainwave. So beta brainwave is an indication that you are awake. So you are conscious, you are awake, you are alert, and you are thinking. Alpha brain waves indicate that your brain is very, very active, but you are not necessarily fully awake. So, this is usually demonstrated when we first close our eyes, when we're first trying to go to sleep. Your brain is trying to relax, but it's still incredibly active. We also see alpha brain waves when we are dreaming, when we're not awake, but our brain is extremely active. Theta brain waves are characterized by random bursts of activity. So we normally see this brain wave when we're trying to get to sleep. And then delta brain waves are the brain waves that are shown when we are in deep sleep. So all activity, both neural and physiological, all activity is at its lowest rate. So to clarify, they're the 4 brain waves that I'm going to be referring to as we work through this sleep cycle. Now, I've advised you to print this sheet out. If you don't have it available to you, it's not the end of the world, but my description of the sleep cycle will kind of fall around this diagram. If you've got it in front of you, annotate it with me as I work through it. If you don't, then you might just want to take some notes on paper, and then we're going to transfer those into your booklet at the end of this process, okay? So everything that I give you now is kind of pinned on this particular diagram. So let's go ahead and start looking at the different stages of the sleep cycle. Now, as I've already clarified a couple of slides ago, each sleep cycle takes approximately, on average, 90 minutes to complete once, and then we repeat it on average about 5 times a night. We can see here that there are 5 stages. We've got stage 1 to 4 listed down the left hand side, and then we've got REM, which is the 5th and final stage of sleep. So let's take a look at what's happening in our brains, what we would see happening on the EEG. So, as we said on the previous slide, if somebody goes into a sleep lab and they monitor their sleep, when they get into the sleep lab, they would be demonstrating beta brain waves, which indicate that we are fully awake, we are conscious, we are alert. However, as soon as we start to close our eyes, the EEG will switch from beta brain waves into alpha brain waves. Remember, your brain is still incredibly active, but you are no longer conscious, awake, alert to the same degree. So when we first close our eyes, we typically show alpha brain waves for less than 5 minutes. Again, please bear in mind that this is if you are a good sleeper. For those of us who have got poor sleep, then you would spend quite a long time in alpha brainwave where you're trying to switch your kind of conscious activity off. But on average, it's less than 5 minutes where we switch from beta, awake, into alpha, trying to go to sleep, all right, trying to close our eyes, trying to relax our conscious thoughts. So this is alpha brainwave shown on the EEG, and that usually lasts less than 5 minutes. After approximately 5 minutes, we start to see the introduction on the EEG of theta brain waves. So the activity at this stage is starting to decline as you fall into deeper sleep, but it's characterized for most of us by regular bursts of activity. Now, sometimes you will be aware of these bursts of activity, but most of the time it has to be said, this is all happening without our conscious awareness. But theta brain waves are kind of famous or characterized by 2 kind of unusual pieces of activity on the EEG, and they are known as the K complex and the sleep spindle. Okay, so I've tried to pick them out of an EEG so you can see kind of what they would look like demonstrated on that neuroimaging technique. But the K complex, you can see there, is a high voltage spike. Okay. Now, if you were aware of a K complex, or if somebody was monitoring you, what the K complex might look like, physiologically speaking, is a random jolt, okay? Sometimes they're big enough to wake you up, but it might be that a limb moves or twitches quite ferociously, and it might sometimes be enough to wake you up. But a K complex is a high voltage spike, and it's normally characterized by some sort of excessive movement. The sleep spindle is not high voltage, it is high amplitude instead. So the brain just goes through a really kind of like fast burst of activity. This would be kind of whirring thoughts. It's less physiological, it's more to do with kind of the cognitive side of things. So a sleep spindle would be just a really kind of fast burst of electrical activity or cognitive activity where the day's thoughts just kind of all spin round very, very temporarily, and then you switch it off and you go into deeper sleep. So they are shown on theta brain waves. They are K complex and sleep spindle, and that's as we are trying to move into the deeper stages of sleep. So about 5 minutes or less than 5 minutes in alpha, which is stage 1, into stage 2 we get theta brain waves, K complex and sleep spindle. Now, just to clarify, and you might want to circle a ring around both of those stages that we've just described. Stage 1 and 2, so stage 1 is alpha sleep, stage 2 is theta sleep. They are both classed as NREM. The N stands for non, so they are both classed as non-REM sleep, and we would also refer to them probably as light sleep. So that's stage 1 and stage 2. Stage 1, alpha brain waves, stage 2, theta brain waves. And also, if we take a look at this diagram, remembering that at the bottom, okay, so on your x-axis, we've got one 90-minute period flagged there. So if we look at the point at which in the cycle we move out of stage 2, it's approximately 15 minutes in. So after about 15 minutes, you will switch out of stage 1 and 2, light sleep, into stages 3 and 4, which is characterized as more deep sleep. So at that point, the EEG will change again. We will move away from theta brain waves, which we've said is characterized by really random bursts of activity, and the brain waves will slow in terms of amplitude and also voltage. They will turn into delta brain waves, which are much more spread out. They are much more low voltage brain waves. So delta indicates that your brain has got the lowest rate of neural activity, but also several other physiological processes slow right down during stages 3 and 4. Just take a few seconds to maybe think what those processes might be, and then I'll clarify them for you. So your neural activity is at its lowest rate. What else do we think is at its lowest rate? Okay, hopefully you were able to come up with things like blood pressure, heart rate, breathing rate, all of those core physiological processes, homeostasis, all of those things are gonna really go to their lowest level. Basically, they don't need to be at any higher level. When we're in deep sleep, we just need to be ticking things over. Also, can't talk. Also, using those functions or performing those functions takes up a lot of energy. And actually, when we're in delta sleep, all of our energy needs to go towards clearing out neurotransmitters in the brain, okay? We want to obviously reset the neurochemistry in our brain when we go into deep sleep. So everything else physiological needs to come to a real halt to give us the energy to perform those neural activities. So physiologically speaking, everything is at a very, very base level. So temperature, breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, all of it will plummet. However, when we are in slow wave sleep or deep sleep, so stages 3 and 4, there is a strange phenomena that occurs, okay? So we're in really, really deep sleep, so neurally speaking, there's not much activity and everything is at a very base level. But there is a strange phenomena that also occurs during very deep sleep. Now, you might already know this, but sleepwalking occurs in the deepest stages of sleep. And you might be thinking, how is that possible if activity is really at its lowest? But remember, all of your basic physiological responses are at a very, very low level. But neurally speaking, you're also kind of switched off. So that's why sleepwalking is still possible, because movement, you're still capable of movement. You don't require much energy to do the things that you do in your sleep if you are sleepwalking. But also, neurally speaking, we're not going to be aware or conscious of it because the brain is almost zoned out at that point in time. So we've got sleepwalking is still possible in stage 4. It normally occurs in the shift between stage 3 and 4 for most sleepwalkers. So we can add that to our notes as well. Now, at this stage, we're approximately 60 minutes into the cycle. Normally, people will spend about 20 to 25 minutes in stages 3 and 4. And then once we hit the 60-minute mark, something strange happens with our EEG, all right? And something strange happens with the cycle. So just take a second, see if you can spot what that is. I've circled the point at which on the diagram I'm referencing. So what happens around about 60 minutes in? And hopefully some of you will have picked up that the cycle goes into reverse. So to clarify, we do not go from stage 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and straight into REM or dream sleep. We have to go back up through the stages. The reason being, it would be really, really physically challenging or physiologically challenging to go from such deep sleep, which is delta brainwave, into such high activity sleep, which is REM sleep or alpha brain waves. If you went through that jump, then that would be really disruptive in terms of your physiology. Okay, you would wake up feeling really, really uncomfortable. You might have sleep paralysis, where you think that you are awake but you're actually not and you're unable to move. So that's why for most people we go from stage 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, back up to 3, back up to 2, and then into REM. So the cycle goes into reverse. Okay, once we hit stage 4, we come back out of it to stage 3, into 2, and then to REM. Okay, so just to clarify, you might want to write that down. That is the order of the cycle, and that repeats itself on a loop, as we've said, approximately 5 times a night. Okay, so into REM sleep then. I have already mentioned it at the start of the lesson, and you're probably already familiar with this from the preview, Dill, but the phenomena that occurs during REM sleep is dreaming. So when we are dreaming, we're obviously experiencing alpha brain waves, which is where the brain is extremely active, but you're not actually awake. That causes muscle twitches to occur, fluctuations in things like temperature and heart rate. Okay, now I have attached a video into the slideshow, but I'm not sure it'll work, so I've linked it onto the assignment as well if you wanted to watch a little clip of what REM looks like. And I'm going to give you a strange instruction here. If you get the opportunity to see anybody falling asleep, have a look for REM. So once they've been asleep for around about 60 to 75 minutes, you might see a period of REM. If any of you have got young children or babies in the house, they go into REM a little bit quicker. Okay, so there is a video. Like I say, I don't think it'll work here, but you can watch it on the link in the assignment. And also, just to point out to you, and this again was in your preview, Dill, the Dement and Kleitman study showed that heart rate and eye movements correspond to the content of your dreams. So if, for example, you dreamt that you were climbing up something, your eye movements would go up and down as opposed to kind of side to side. So during REM sleep, we have dreaming, where muscle twitches are common and fluctuation in temperature and heart rate. However, our muscles actually experience something called atonia. Now, atonia is the correct term for paralysis or partial paralysis. So our brains are extremely active, but our bodies experience atonia or paralysis. Now, for that reason, REM sleep is often called paradoxical sleep, because you're experiencing 2 alternate states: extremely high levels of brain activity, but extremely low levels of physical activity. And all that's done, the only reason why that happens is to protect us so that we don't act out on the contents of our dreams. Okay, so That's the full cycle completed, okay? But just to add on a little bit of extra, and obviously if we're trying to push for that really high marks on the ultradian rhythm, we would want to include this section kind of at the end. So with REM sleep, your cycles get shorter in terms of slow wave sleep, i.e. we stop going into slow wave sleep. Once your body and your brain has kind of restored itself, there's no need to go into those really deep stages of sleep anymore. So as the cycles go through the course of the night, you'll stop going into stage 3 and 4 and you'll have longer periods of REM. And that is usually used to explain two things. So you could write these down. Why we're more likely to wake up at 3 a.m. because by 3 a.m. we're kind of floating around stage 2 sleep and REM sleep and just going in and out of stage 2, back to REM, stage 2, back to REM. So you become more aware of your surroundings, or for example, if you wanted to go to the toilet. And why we're also more likely to have more dreams and remember them in the morning, okay? So you won't necessarily remember your dreams from the start of the night, but you will remember them at the end of the night or into the morning because you've been most recently in a period of REM, okay? So with all of that done, okay, there is this kind of gap fill activity that we're going to do on Monday morning anyway, but I want you to just take a look at some of these gaps. Using the notes that you've got in front of you, you might want to work through this and see if you're confident enough to fill some of those in just whilst it's on the screen. If you feel like you really have understood it well, turn your notes over in the first instance and see how much of this we can complete, okay? So pause that here, keep that up on the screen for yourselves, guys. See how much of that you can fill in. And then I will reveal the answers in a moment. So pause this here. Okie doke. I'm going to start revealing now the answers. I'm not going to read them all out to you. You can just see what the correct responses were. And like I said, we will do this as an entry task on Monday morning to check whether or not you have understood the ultradian rhythm in full. So with that consolidation task done now, we need to move into our booklets, okay? So you are opening up your booklets, please, to page 60, I think it is, page 59, okay? So on page 59, you will see this little table presented to you. I filled in some of the material already, so I've given you the length and the type of sleep that we are seeing, just because students tend to get a little bit confused with the durations because they overlap quite a bit. But I'd like you now to go ahead and fill in the brain activity. So that's the brain waves that we are seeing on the EEG, and then the physiological effects. So what physiological changes are we seeing during each of those stages, okay? When we do the gap fill activity on Monday morning, we will then fold that in to our booklets on page 59, so you've got a nice detailed description of the ultradian rhythm, okay? So we're going to move away, once you've done that, from the sleep cycle and onto our second example of a ultradian rhythm, which is known as the basic rest activity cycle, aka BRAC. So pop the sleep cycle to one side once you're done with that, and then we're going to take a look at example 2. Okay. So what I've got on my screen at the moment is a detailed description of the BRAC cycle. We're then going to use that to go ahead and fill in the gaps on page 60. So I'm not going to read this to you. Just take a moment to pause the video here and have a scan through the BRAC cycle there. Okie doke. So you should have been able to have a read of that. Okay, you can see that the BRAC cycle is an ultradian rhythm because it repeats on the same duration approximately as the sleep cycle, so around about 90 minutes. So let's go ahead and fill in those gaps. So the BRAC cycle is characterized by a period of alertness followed by a spell of fatigue. This occurs every 90 minutes, and obviously there is a range to consider there that you might want to highlight throughout the day. In the first half of the basic rest activity cycle, when we feel alert and focused, the brain waves are Now I'm hoping we'll be able to fill this in. So what brain waves would we suggest are occurring? It's not necessarily on the screen. What are we thinking? If we are alert and conscious and awake, what brain waves would that be? So we should be popping beta brain waves in there. In the last 20 minutes of each cycle, when we feel dreamy and tired, the brain waves are alpha, okay? Because alpha brain waves are where our brain is a little bit more relaxed. It's wanting to go to sleep and have dreams. So we get the transition between beta brain waves, awake, and then we've got alpha brain waves where we feel a little bit more dreamy, a little bit more tired. The Brack cycle explains why students often find it difficult to concentrate for longer than 90 minutes. So that's why our lessons are only ever 90 minutes long, and also why people need breaks when they're working. Okay, so that's the basic rest activity cycle, and that is your secondary example of the ultradian rhythm. Okay. So we're now going to move into the evaluation points, or the discussion points rather, for ultradian research. I'm just going to pop up on the screen some prompters that I want you to have a look over before we go into the booklets, okay? So we've got practical implications for employers and the economy. I would say a lot of you are getting quite good at writing this style of point now. So this would be definitely something for those people to consider including if we got a 16 marker on ultradian research. And then we've got methodological problems with researching sleep in the way that Dement and Kleitman did, which we're going to look at in a moment. So just take a look over these, have a think about what you might choose to say about practical implications for the economy and methodological problems investigating sleep in the way that Dement and Kleitman did. Okay. Pause that here, and once you're ready, we can move forward. Okay, so on page 60 in your booklets, you'll see the first strength of research into ultradian rhythms is supporting evidence. So this comes from Dement and Kleitman, which I know you're familiar with from your preview, Dill. So we're just going to go ahead and fill these gaps in. Okay, take a look at those gaps in the first instance. Use your preview, Dill, to try and complete what goes into those spaces, and then we'll just clarify them. So pause this here. Okay. So, first gap, 9 participants had their sleep patterns monitored in a sleep lab through recording brainwave activity. You might want to add to your booklet using an EEG and also an EOG as well, which is recording eye movements. So the O is ocular. And they had a self-report technique where they were asked to recollect what dreams they had had when they'd been woken up at certain points during their sleep. Results showed that most dreaming occurs in REM sleep, and the brain activity corresponded to how vivid the dreams were. They also found that direction of eye movements was found to relate to the content of a dream in REM sleep. So this demonstrates that sleep consists of 5 separate and distinct stages, each categorized by a different brainwave activity, and is therefore an example of an ultradian rhythm. Over onto page 61, we've got this practical applications point. So, research investigating the sleep cycle using EEG recordings has also revealed that similar 90-minute cycle known as the Brack cycle. This potentially has had a positive impact on students and employer work habits. So, we're going to write into the space provided the following point. This would mean that workers require regular breaks in line with the 90-minute cycle show, which most employers do stick to. If employers were to offer this, it would greatly improve the productivity of employees and also students. It could further reduce the amount of time that workers take off sick due to fatigue and could ultimately then create less of a burden on the NHS. And if we were really stretching that economy point out, we would say that those funds would be able to be spent elsewhere on different services. So that's the practical applications. However, there are methodological issues with the research from Dement and Kleitman. So when we're investigating sleep patterns, participants are going to obviously be subjected to specific artificial circumstances. They're going to be attached to monitors. They're not going to be sleeping in the same way that they would do if they were in the comfort of their own homes. The procedure is classed as invasive, leading them to sleep in a way that is not representative of their normal sleep cycle. Additionally, we've got a number of variables that affect the outcomes, okay? So just have a think there, all right, what those variables might be and how your sleep changes depending on extraneous variables. You can go ahead and add anything down. So sleep is affected by a number of variables such as what affects your sleep, okay? Think about when your quality of sleep changes. You might be able to say things like exercise done during the day, your diet, what drinks you've consumed, so if there's been any excess caffeine consumed, your stress levels, potentially due to things like relationships or work, for example. So all of those need to be factored in because they would change your brainwave patterns when you're going to sleep. So coupled with the fact that it's already in an artificial sleep lab, that creates issues because they act as confounding variables. That therefore means that the research lacks both ecological and internal validity because we've got problems with the artificial nature and we've got problems with confounding variables. So that now brings us to the end then of the section on ultradian rhythms. I do just want to finish with this, and you might want to add this to maybe the bottom of page 61, and I have said this recently to you in lesson, that the word research in psychology doesn't necessarily mean that you need to describe key studies. The word research means theory or a description of a process in this case. So just be aware that when we use the word research, you can get away with just describing the process, or in this example, describing the rhythm, okay? Also, to discuss means to describe and evaluate. And if we are discussing, then our strengths and weaknesses should be somewhat balanced, okay? So that's just to clarify, when we get the word research in a psychology question, it does not necessarily mean that it wants a description of a study in the AO1. That would typically be a description of a process or a description of a theory. Then we bring evaluative commentary in, which can include supporting evidence. Okay, hopefully that's been okay for you guys, and that's now the ultradian rhythm completed, and we just need to follow up with the infradian rhythm portion on Monday morning. Thanks for watching.